Welcome to another episode of Storytelling in the Tropics. My name is Allison Harrison. It's season 2, and my first guest for season 2 is none other than Dr. Sonjah Stanley Niaah. Welcome, Dr. Niaah.
Oh my gosh, what a privilege. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, you have so many things behind your name, so many descriptions: author, lecturer, academic, all of those things. Well, let's take it right back to the beginning, to your community. What community are you from? Where were you born?
You know, I was born in Sandy Bay in Hanover. I'm the only child born in my grandparents' house by the sea. The house wasn't on the sea, but I could, in that house, hear the sea.
Okay.
And we spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house, but we lived in Great River, which is the border between St. James and Hanover. And for a while, I grew up there. We left that house when I was 8, almost 9, and moved into what is now my family home in Montego Bay.
Montego Bay.
So most of my growing up years were spent in between Hanover and Montego Bay, and I represent as a Montegonian. So if people ask me where am I from, I'm from Montego Bay, but I was absolutely born in Hanover.
Okay. And what about your early school days?
So early schooling, first school I went to, which was Montego Bay Prep. So Montego Bay, my mother used to work in Montego Bay, so it was quite easy for her to be, part of the way in which we all went from the house into Montego Bay. And then I went to Bethel All Age, and then from Bethel All Age in Hopewell, I went to Barracks Road Primary, and from there went to high school, Mount Alvernia High School. From Mount Alvernia High School, Montego Bay Community College, and from Montego Bay Community College to University of the West Indies. But I think if I were to think about the most impacting years for me growing up, it would be between the time spent in Hanover, Great River, right, on the border, and the time before I left Montego Bay to come to Kingston for university. So, my primary school years, I remember quite a bit. Air Supply and the music of my day, they still reverberate in my brain. I still remember the people I was interacting with. In fact, I got a call recently from somebody I've known from primary school who is in a university in New York operating. Quite interesting that I'm still in touch with some of the people from even primary school.
Right.
And then high school was very, 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 very interesting because as much as I was an average student doing all my work, I was a little outspoken, let's say.
To this day.
I was a little outspoken. And something very interesting happened at high school. I had I walked with a kind of pack of people. There were 5 of us, sometimes 6 in high school. But I had very close friends in high school. I'm still in touch with them.
All of them?
Not all of them. At least, 2 of them in particular. Mm-hmm. And my high school years ended in a very interesting way because at some point now, when everybody was to graduate, the principal told my parents that I was not one to graduate.
Why?
And it wasn't because of my grades. It wasn't anything that I could identify, in fact. And when my parents went to ask the principal, Sister Joan Clare, I will never forget her, what the problem was, there was no significant explanation. So, I just chalked it up to the teachers did not like me. And what's interesting about every time you have a disappointing experience is that you find a way to dig deep inside of yourself. So
Right.
I remember sitting under the guinea tree at the high school, Mount Alvernia High School, and I said to myself, but I'm going to pass my exams anyway. I'm going to become somebody anyway.
Right.
What does graduation really matter? And for people who are into rituals, the ritual of graduation is trumped up in very, auspicious ways in Jamaica, around the world really.
Mm-hmm.
But you really must have something deep inside of yourself, character even, to tell yourself what you need to be told at the times when disappointments such as those come.
Right.
Because I said, but there gonna be somebody anyway. What
And you
this
told yourself
moment
that.
I sat down under the tree on the concrete bench and told myself this at 15. I said, but what does this matter really? I'm going to pass my exams anyway, and I'm going to become somebody anyway. And that story is so interesting because, I knew one day they'd call me back to the school. And so said, so done. I remember when I got the email and the principal of the day asked me to come and speak to the graduating class. I remember forwarding the email to my mother and my sister with the line, I knew this day would come.
And you did it, right?
And of course I did it. I accepted the invitation with gratitude, with humility. And I went and I told this story about a girl named Nadine, which is my middle name.
Right.
And all of the students in the front, as I was looking at their faces, telling them about this story. This girl named Nadine who, really didn't like rules and, had an issue with authority and made sure that, she learned after a while from her experiences. I said, well, Nadine's story is my story. And they all kind of, you could see their mouths drop.
Right.
But it's important to be honest about the life you've lived.
Yes.
And so I had no challenges sharing my story because after a while, you know that a fear story. Embrace yourself.
And that's what makes you you.
Yes, embrace yourself, live in integrity, live with yourself.
Yeah.
Who else you gonna live with?
Right.
If you can't live with yourself.
Right. Right.
So I knew that those experiences were important for me.
Right.
Very important.
You are very much a doctor of culture.
I am a culture doctor.
Yes. So what sparked that decision for you to take that path to study culture, especially Jamaican culture?
I would have to say that my parents being so such adventurous people, such open-minded people, such people grounded in Jamaican culture, I would have to say that this begins with them. I was traveling out of Jamaica from I was an early teenager, 12. I wasn't even a teenager yet, actually. And I think being exposed to other cultures, being cued into what's happening in your own country. My parents were ones to travel from, we every weekend we were somewhere else. It's either we were visiting my grandparents, we were going to my uncle in St. Elizabeth, we were going to St. Anne to my other grandparents. My parents were very adventurous people. And I think that made all the better for me to be an exposed human being. And the exposure, I tell people all the time, there's nothing like exposure because it means you're not locked into your own insular, myopic perspective of the world. So with the richness of what is Jamaican culture, remember now I had my grandparents in tow. I would be spending time with my grandparents all the time. We used to hear those stories. I had my uncles around. People were visiting from abroad. A very rich context for exchange and exposure. But I think if I were to really now hone in on what is the experience that made me so interested in Jamaican culture, 3 things happened. One is my father was a policeman and he worked at events like Sunsplash.
I see.
So Reggae Sunsplash becomes something of a legendary thing in my experience because my parents one year got it into their brain that they needed to have a stall and sell food. And so my uncle and the whole family, his children, and at this point I'm like 13, right? High school. So we were children at Sunsplash. And I can never forget Rita Marley on stage at Jarrett Park singing One Draw. I mean, there's nothing significant about the song except that they had to pull up the song several times over because it was just released and it was taking life at Sunsplash. At Jarrett Park. More importantly, though, Sunsplash comes into my consciousness prior to that year, me being 13. So I tell you, we lived at Great River.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a major flood that happened in 1979, June 12 flood. And June 12 flood left the Great River Bridge. It broke down. At 4 o'clock one morning, we heard a big crash. The bridge broke down. Mm-hmm. And what's significant about this is not that there were 3 days of flooding, that, and weeks later the bridge broke down because the banks had been so eroded, is that the people who went to Sunsplash that night could not get back to their places of abode in Hanover.
Right.
Because the bridge broke down and they had to use canoes now to cross the bridge. Mm-hmm. And so Sunsplash I started to hear about Sunsplash at age 8.
Right.
Going on 9, because there were people who couldn't get back to Negril and to, wherever they were staying in these places. Mm-hmm. And so, all right, I hear about Sunsplash. You forget these things, is when me turn big woman. I try to reflect on the work that I'm doing, that I remember these things.
Yes.
So, music, therefore, becomes a major part. The music and the cultural experience around the consumption of music becomes a major part of what I am as a child.
Right.
So, beyond Sunsplash goes defunct. Sumfest becomes the event. And I become really interested in music. So mm-hmm. at Mount Alvernia High School, for example, we saw Supercat in concert.
I see.
By the time I got to Montego Bay Community College, dancehall is absolutely my favorite, genre of music to consume. Mm-hmm. I was going to Pier 1 to listen to Pieces music on a Friday night. I remember, in fact, the night Peter Tosh died. Mm-hmm. My father was dropping my sister and myself to Pier 1 for an evening of revelry. And we could hear the news about the shooting at Peter Tosh's house on the radio as my father was dropping us to Pier 1. So now listen now, my parents were therefore the kind of people who had no problems with their children, and my mother has 2 daughters, going to Pier 1, going to Sunsplash, going to Sumfest. Because this is Jamaica.
This is Jamaica.
This is the substance of who we are as a people. Mm-hmm. There's a way in which music is so much a part of what we do to celebrate.
Yes.
Celebrate anniversary, death.
Everything.
Celebrate marriage, celebrate your child born, christening, everything.
We celebrate everything.
So by the time I was 18,
yes,
and moving from Montego Bay now into university, I had already been, culturally aware and well established in terms of my likes and dislikes in terms of music. Mm-hmm. And then my parents were party people too. So by 5 years old, my parents were having their 5th wedding anniversary party, bashment. I remember dancing the chucky out on the lawn. My parents would just, be hosting people and parties and events at the house. Lots of food and fun.
Right.
But by the time I went to university now, I was also quite formed and established in terms of my academic interests. So from second form in high school was really an important time because I was doing a whole heap of things. But I certainly fell in love. I certainly fell in love with geography. I was traveling out to Jamaica by the time I was 12 in second form.
Yes.
I was, interested in geography. I knew that much. Yeah, at 12, you're not doing very much except that you're becoming yourself, right?
Right.
So I knew that I was going to university to study geography. And I did a degree in geography. And geography made me even more aware of the world. Mm-hmm. More aware of, the politics of culture. And I don't think I was a great geography student. I used to fall asleep in some of my classes, especially if they were 8 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But I made an impression enough it made an impression on me, and I made an impression on certainly my teachers enough for me to know that I wanted to do postgraduate work in geography. I remember saying to one of my teachers, I want to do a postgraduate degree in geography. And she says, no.
Okay.
She said, no. She said, no, go and work first. And I did exactly that. University was also, my undergraduate years very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I got kicked off Mary C. Cole Hall in the first 3 weeks of my arrival.
Why?
You break a rule, you get kicked
So,
off. The
what-
warden decided
Which rule
that
did you
it was
break,
not
Sonjah?
appropriate for me to remain on the hall, even though I was out of Montego Bay as a student coming all the way from the country. The fact is, I was kicked off hall.
Which rule did you break, Sonjah?
Me not gonna talk about that right here for now. The fact is, me was kicked off the hall.
Great.
And there came another moment for me to say to myself, but what that have to do with me becoming somebody? And today, clearly, I'm still at the same university. I function in a capacity where I can share those kinds of stories with people,
Yes.
enough to have them understand that building character is not a smooth sailing path. It's about a rocky road that allows you to look at your shoes and look at your feet and look at your toes and say, are you going to go forward or not?
Right.
Right? So my undergraduate years at university were quite interesting. Me never get in no other trouble. Me wasn't one to smoke weed.
Right.
I was offered these things. But I was more interested in the culture, which is where I'm getting back to. That I was fetting and I was consuming music. I remember the off-campus limes.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting so interested in Portland, where we went for an off-campus lime, that I went home and told my parents about Portland. And they said, let's go for a weekend.
Portland is
And
fantastic.
we went for a weekend in Portland.
Yes.
So I was also one to share my experiences. I was learning and growing, and also quite interested in sharing and teaching.
Yes.
And just to say that by the time I was 9 years old, I knew that I was interested in teaching.
9.
Yeah, ma'am, I used to go home from school at 6 and 7 and go home and play school in the backyard with the hibiscus bush. I used to go and call out the students' names, give them homework, B2 must get disciplined, and play school. And so it's so funny because even when we got summer holidays, I knew I wanted to be in school. Weekends and summer holidays were kind of weird times because I wanted to be in school.
Interesting. So you really couldn't function in this new virtual education?
No, man, I could function, man. And I do function. I have to teach.
As a student?
No, I would function because what happens in every era is that you adjust.
Mm-hmm.
That's what human beings do. You get thrown a situation and you adjust. You either sink or swim, you adjust.
True.
So I knew I wanted to teach. I wanted to be in school. I wanted to be a leader. And I suppose even unconsciously, these things just they happen,
Yes. So, geography undergrad, geography postgrad.
No, I didn't end up doing geography postgrad at all.
Okay.
Remember, she told me no.
Right. So
She
I
told
wonder.
me no,
I
and
thought-
she said, go and work first. So I ended up working in a context, trying to use my geography. So I did some urban planning. I worked in a context where urban planning was happening, Iran Spiro and Associates. I then went to Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust. So I was always, in some way, environmental, geographical work. And I realized at Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust that I was in the wrong job, but in the right institution.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a development officer, chartered with raising funds, but I had no interest in that at the time.
Right.
I had an interest in research. So I realized then and there that if you want to do research, you need further training.
Right.
And so I left Jamaica. I went to live in Washington, D.C. for 2 years. And I was just exposing myself to another part of the world. So I could go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing a whole lot of research. I had then, developed an interest in psychology. I wanted to understand what was it that was causing people to really hate themselves as black people, which I encountered in the United States. I encountered people who, just really insecure How do you live in a context where you are considered a minority in that society, where you are almost, in equal numbers to whites?
Right.
It's just, it became a bizarre thing for me to understand, because of course I come from little Jamaica, but with Talawa.
Right.
With Talawa, we forthright, we confident, we not understand nothing about minority. This
Right.
minority thinking, we don't understand it.
No.
And that experience living in the States did something else for me, because I then began to empathize and to think about the depth of knowledge that one would need to have in order to understand, psychoses and sociopathy in relation to racism. I also had to deal with some things in the US related to domestic violence. I was living in a context where I was not a victim, but I was a witness to domestic violence, and that really also contributed to my interest in psychology. What is this learned behavior that renders people almost, ineffective? You can't get yourself out of a situation where you are absolutely being abused.
Right.
What is it that renders somebody incapable of leaving a context where they're being beaten? So I needed to understand that, and I left the US and I came back to Jamaica to do social psychology in the Department of Sociology, Psychology and Social Work at the University of the West Indies.
Okay.
And that's where I planted my foot again back into doing graduate work. And I knew, you just know. You
Yes.
know, say you want to be in a school. You
Yes.
know, say you need to just figure out what you want to do in a school and just go through.
Right.
And the Department of Sociology was very good to me. I got a job. For the first time, I was a student and a student worker. I was a teaching assistant, getting paid to study, getting paid to teach, getting paid to transmit knowledge. And so I met some great teachers. I will never forget people like Clement Branch, bright, someone who encouraged me to think in ways that I had not begun to think before. And I met people who were mentors, people like Pat Anderson. And I met some people who are now my greatest friends,
Right.
Karen Carpenter. All happened in the Department of Sociology, Psychology and
She's
Social Work.
the sex doctor.
She's the sexpert, the clinical sexologist. And I cherish those years, because all of what I am today go back to those initial years of me trying to figure out those psychological questions. And I answered them. Them because I ended up moving away from psychology in a very deliberate way. Not social psychology, but the clinical psychological development psychology dimensions. Because I asked myself the question one day, I said, but what do you need from clients, if you were to become a clinical psychologist? And I said, no, I'm not going that route. I'm not taking no patients with me.
Right.
And so I then started to, link with people who were coming to Jamaica to study dancehall. And I remember Bibi Bakari Yosef asking me, who is studying the ecology of dancehall? And I said, nobody. And that, my dear, became the moment of clarity for me in terms of my academic work.
Dancehall.
The moment of clarity. Because remember now, I had been consuming the music. I had been a part of the culture. I had been living in these live music events in a way that other people did not get a chance to experience. Being from Montego Bay, I was very much there. And so by the time I started to think about this question of the ecology of dancehall, I ended up writing a research proposal. And so social psychology in the Department of Sociology started to mean less and less and less and less and less to me, because there was nobody there to supervise the work that I wanted to do. And so I started to do a PhD in cultural studies. And that became my disciplinary home. I teach cultural studies. My research is in the area of cultural studies. And cultural studies, because it's interdisciplinary, you get to bring in the things that are your academic interests or the things that you need in order to shed light on the questions you don't have answers for.
Just to kind of digress a little bit, with what is going on with the landscape of dancehall now, there is a clear line that has been drawn with this new age dancehall. They call it trap dancehall, and you have the dancehall of Shabba,
1990s, 1980s.
Supercat, Beanie Man, Bounty Killer, who are still relevant today. Even the verses battle brought to light Beanie Man, Bounty Killer,
Killer. And more lately,
Supercat, and some of the newer artists. What is
Dexter Daps,
they're
Conscience,
right?
and so on.
What is the problem?
Is there a problem?
Some people have problems.
Some people have problems.
All right.
So let me answer from this perspective. First of all, only some people are going to see a problem, and that's the thing about culture. Depending on your perspective, there is no problem. Depending on your perspective, there's a massive problem. Depending on your perspective, the culture gone, it mash up.
Right.
But there is something that you can't forget when you're a student of culture. You can't forget that the cycle of time is always there, circulating, that bring things from the past into the future, and things in the future that will be the past in the future.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Right.
So because of that knowledge, and I've seen it over and over and over, how the cycle of life takes over. I've seen it. I have no anxiety in the way that somebody who is not studying culture would have anxiety. So there's a space for trap dancehall because the cross-fertilization that is inherent in the evolution of music is something that is a built-in way to keep music relevant and current.
Right.
It's a built-in mechanism. If you don't have cross-fertilization in culture, cultures die.
Right.
That's what happens when if something should happen and, God forbid, a meteorite come strike, right? And everybody just dead off. If there was no cross-fertilization, nobody out there would be doing any Afrobeats that's influenced by dancehall. No Kwaito, no Bangra, no Makossa, no Fuji, no nothing, no hip-hop.
Right.
So the fact is that you have a sort of foolproof method of preservation, of cross-fertilization, and of evolution.
Yeah, I think it's just making space.
And I think most people who don't understand that, they start to think about censorship and the way in which we must clamp down. And my perspective is always the social context is what matters most. The socio-cultural context is what matters most. And I say that because it's not that I'm against censorship when it's necessary. It's not that I don't understand artistic license. It's that I understand that in Jamaica, where we have challenges around misogyny, homophobia, rape, incest, what might be constituted under broad categories of sexual abuse, sexual assault, we must be able to look at ourselves and our music and ask ourselves, well, where are we going with this? Is trap dancehall the answer? Is dancehall the answer? Are there ways in which we need to be looking at, really calling our artists to consider seriously their social context? Because you can't tell me that they're unaware. They're not unaware. Every family in Jamaica has a story about rape, sexual abuse. Every single one. Every single family in Jamaica has a story about sexual abuse. Every family in Jamaica has a story about some kind of violence. My cousin, for example, was murdered in her bed one night by her husband. He might have been of some kind of mental challenge. It may have been jealousy. I don't know. I wasn't even a teenager yet. The fact is that or I probably was just a teenager when this happened. The fact is, for like a country of 2 point something, 3 million people, why can't we control crime and violence? Why do we have these sociopathic tendencies? This is something that we really have to consider. And so I am committing myself to investigating some of these questions.
They're saying they're pointing fingers at the music, though.
Yes, they're pointing fingers at the music, and I'm saying that this is where the people who are producing music, the people who are consumers of music, the people who are writing music, they must consider their social context. If the social context is throwing up some kind of pathological elements, we must consider the social context. We must have social responsibility. We must begin to look at ourselves.
Yes.
We don't have no Messiah come save we. Not for the kind of statistics I'm looking at in terms of rape, violence, crime. No. And some people argue that if you really want to solve crime, if you really want to reduce crime, there are ways to do that. So somebody profits from crime.
If we're serious about it.
Yes, if we're serious about it, it's a solvable issue. Somebody profits from crime in the way that crime exists in Jamaica right now. And I'm not unaware of the fact that we are a transshipment point for all kinds of things. We're located in the middle of the ocean, and people from all over the place can come here easily, dock up on a shore. Yeah? The plane land. But I'm very clear that there are other countries, larger than Jamaica, population size more than Jamaica, and they are controlling crime. What's so wrong with us? What's so wrong with us?
I think there are a lot of things that we do that have become the norm that we no longer see it as really a problem.
Yeah, and that's the thing about, things, when you talk about a culture of rape or a culture of violence, that it becomes normalized.
Yeah.
It becomes normalized so much so that when you see it, there's no longer a knee-jerk reaction. There's no longer shock. And you have to ask yourself, is that how we are going to be 20 years from now? I mean, when is it time to fix it? When is it time to fix it, though? I mean, and I keep saying, this is a controversial view, but I'm going to say it. When we feed our population with violence in the media, the newspaper, and not positive stories all the time, we can expect to have people regurgitate that. So it's not just the music, it's all forms of media. So whether it is, you can talk about the cable, you can talk about the movies, you can talk about, the video games, all of those things matter. And unfortunately, we're at a point where it's gone through the gate because we haven't even begun to have conversations really about regulating the internet in Jamaica.
Right.
And perhaps there are people who would flatly reject that. We're not China. How do you go about regulating something that you were never thinking of regulating before? But the way in which, responsible people operate is that you begin to think about the things that you have never done and how you're going to do them in the future in order to save your population.
Right.
That's what leadership is about.
Right.
That's what responsible leadership is about. And I have hope. I have hope because, when I think about a sexual harassment bill that's just needing a few corrections now to become, instituted. When I think about, the conversations we've had about marital rape, when I think about how much we are progressing in terms of even just fighting crime, every now and again, we go up a notch in terms of our capacity to fix a problem. I have some hope. Because I don't think you can lose hope.
No.
I don't think you can afford to lose hope.
No. That's when you die.
Yeah, I don't think you can afford to lose hope.
Okay. So let's get back on your journey now as the culture doctor. So you discovered that the study of culture is where it's at for you. And then there came the book.
Yes. So By the time I started asking questions about the evolution of the ecology of dancehall, wrote a proposal, got into the PhD program, and I finished my PhD in record time with two children in tow. Two young children, one born inside of the PhD, one born just before I started. And that's just testimony about how motivated I was based on the work I was doing.
Right.
And I remain motivated. I remain motivated because Jamaica has gifted the world some very important things. 7 or 8 distinct genres of music, depending on who you're speaking to.
Yes.
And we in Jamaica are unaware of how much we have gifted the world, which is part of my challenge, that every single child in Jamaica must know what it is we have contributed culturally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm my disciplinary home is a comfortable space for me, because my mission is to make sure that our libraries are filled with writings by people like me, and the children who will come to be inspired by people like me.
Right.
And who will understand that the power that you have is to define yourself, to write your own stories, to tell your own stories, and to be able to stock your library with things written by yourself and your people.
I agree.
Our libraries are stocked with things written by other people about us.
Yes.
So we have to reverse that.
Yes.
And culturally, it means something for identity.
Mm-hmm.
Because the power to define yourself, to tell your own story, is all about your own identity.
Yes.
And you say to yourself, but how Jamaica so little and Talawa, we have so much confidence. And the flip side of that is that, we question ourselves. We don't even know what we've given the world.
That is true.
It's a paradox. It's a perfect paradox.
So you believe that it starts, the evolution of awareness of ourselves begins in the libraries, in literature.
Oh, yes. And I mean, oral culture is a part of that,
Yes,
because
definitely.
there's the library of the oral,
Yes,
the
absolutely.
stories, the worldview,
Yes.
the entire cosmology.
An awareness of
But-
our stories then.
And then I had to dig deep into that to write the book I wrote. And the book is is very much a collection of the work I did as under the PhD program. The book Dancehall, From Slave Ship to Ghetto, listen, that book has carried me to every single corner of the planet. And that's what happens when you write a book that you are inspired to write.
Yes.
Because let me tell you, I'm a member of the UNESCO's Slave Road Project as a member of the International Scientific Committee because of that book.
Yes.
I mean, that book, I tell people I didn't write it. I did not write that book. I could not have written that book because I was waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning with insights about that book. Told to me from, whatever name you want to call that realm. There is only one mind.
Mm-hmm.
Things that I could not have, you don't just sit down and think about those things.
Right.
So I know that book was inspired.
Yes.
And I think I give honor and praise to the elements and the energies that were with me throughout the process of writing that book.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that book will continue to take me all over the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Into spaces. Just that book. Just that book is my ticket.
Are there similar works that you're working on?
Yes. So I have other collections, edited collections. But my next project, long overdue, is on international reggae festivals. Going back to that Sunsplash story.
Yeah, the Sunsplash thing is so your, and I've seen you post, you tweet about the importance of music festivals.
Mm-hmm.
And here in Jamaica, we have parties of all sizes every night. So, is it very important, in your opinion, for large festivals, or is it like these smaller gatherings can still be important to pushing the culture forward?
Oh, they're not mutually exclusive at all. Large festivals are just a different end of the commercial spectrum in terms of events.
Right.
So small events, street parties. So okay, so and also geographically speaking, the small events are community events. They are there to build community vibe, you know, offer economic opportunities for people in a community.
Yes.
And that's how they started. You know, Nan is one spot where, you know, Sir Cox and Dodd sound system used to play. Was about a bar making money on the street, building a community vibe as an economic opportunity.
Right.
So we're clear about that. That's how you're going to send your picnic to school.
Right.
You know. But at the other end of the community spectrum, at the other end of the commercial spectrum, are these large festivals, and they're all over the world. And people will, you know, there are people who think that Reggae Sunsplash, for example, was the first reggae festival. It wasn't. There were people having reggae events outside of Jamaica, and the people who started Sunsplash were clear that Jamaica could, in fact, host such events.
Right.
What happened to we and reggae come from Jamaica?
Right.
But what's interesting about these festivals, as I've been studying, is that when you talk to people in Jamaica about the importance of reggae or the importance of this festival to them, you get a completely different answer from when you go to Europe or the United States, Africa. Completely different answer. And the answer is related to whether it is a spiritual pilgrimage for you versus not.
Right.
Whether it's a way to link with a family spirit for you versus not.
Right.
Whether it's just a means of consuming music versus not.
Yes.
So there are answers related to, you know, just, I come to be with my family, my reggae family. Many persons in Jamaica don't speak like that about the music. You know, this morning I was in a meeting with someone from South Africa, and every time I speak to South Africans, they tell me how much Jamaica is rooted in their spiritual, you know, sort of aura and psyche. Because Jamaican music did a lot for them, saved them from a life of badness. I remember Bogle told me that when I interviewed him years ago, that the music saved him from a life of badness. In this case, for him, dancehall music. But there's something really special and particular about the energy that comes from Jamaica that is there to inspire people outside of Jamaica that Jamaicans know nothing about.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
Dancehall is huge in Africa.
Everywhere.
Huge.
Dancehall is huge everywhere.
Everywhere.
I go to Dubai, and there are dancehall reggae artists on stage, and there are people in Dubai who singing the thing word for word. It is something that travels seamlessly in an invisible way. People are consuming music all over the world, and you don't know. There's just no. I mean, there's a science to it because we know what's happening in terms of radio and the spins,
Right.
and you know. But now with the internet,
Yeah.
everything is just
open.
completely accessible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything is completely accessible,
Well.
whether you're using a VPN or not.
Right. right. Right.
Whether you're on the dark web or not,
Right.
the deep web or not.
Right.
You know?
Right. So we've been talking a lot about your journey as into culture and studying culture, Jamaican culture. When we initially spoke about doing this interview, you made a suggestion about one of your poems. I'm going to draw you out on that. I want to hear one or two of your poems right now.
So I want to. I mean, I don't know them out of the top of my head, so I have to get
Yes,
the
no
details.
problem. Take your time.
Right. And I'm good with sharing. Most people don't know.
Exclusive for Storytelling in the Tropics with Allison Harrison, Dr. Stanley Niaah sharing her poetry. So this is the poetry slam section of Storytelling in the Tropics.
You know, Allison, you're going to get me to do something that I've not done publicly before. This is very interesting that the first poem that came up is one about my grandmother.
Let's go.
And then I'll share another one after that. I call myself a closet poet, I call myself a closet poet.
Well, I'm here to release you, ma'am.
So this one is called Mama Blackhall, PhD, and I wrote this from 1996
Okay.
on the passing of my grandmother. And this came just out of the spirit. Mama Blackhall, PhD. Matriarch from the motherland, quarter Irish husband, walking around for years with a dissertation she never thought to write. Yes, Mama Blackhall is PhD, if you please, not because she never went to UC. She went to Africa in her memory, to England to live the black and white script, bore 7 children, their children, and transformed the dissertation from words to action, transformed its very essence. Remedies, what you say? Mama Blackhall had them in memory. Remedy for throatache, backache, heartache, remedy and concoction can't done, defiant as they come to anything prescribed from westernized tongue. Mama Blackhall would say, anything too black no good, especially when talking about boyfriends for her children. But that is what her mouth would say. Me know, say you did know. No, said the black skin told you all you needed to know. Cause where the remedy them come from? Not ancestral memory, not Africa, the land that give you the melanin to protect you from the sunburn. Not Africa, that drum up the beat so you can dance. In spite of the colonizer in your words, your big brown eyes had the fire behind them. Your hands had the love they never thought to hold back. In your pot, the food you cook to sustain us. It is just you, yourself, and your drum beat. Yes, your remedies will go on and on. Teach us some more about yourself. That is what this generation have to carry on, the fire, more intense, have a brighter, hotter, the love, have a lovelier, so it can warm the generation then before them come. Listen, stop. You might just be able to see the dissertation in my eyes.
From 1996.
1996, me never did a thing about a PhD yet.
So
I wasn't even thinking about a PhD yet.
if you can remember the place you were at.
No, you know what is most important though? That poem they sound good enough. A long time in a seat.
It is a good poem.
Oh my God! Do you know my best friend, one of my best friends living in Washington State, I sent her this because I typed it up, and she emailed it back to me in 2021.
It's a good poem.
I'm telling you, I read it a while ago and I said, wow.
That don't bad.
Don't bad at all.
Don't bad.
Don't bad at all. So let me switch gears now.
Yes, let's get into one of the...
This is a very short one, perhaps one of the shortest of my poems.
Okay.
And then I'll read one more after this.
Please.
It was just the fedora, walking as it does on someone else's head. Someone not you. Someone reminding me that head was just not you.
And that's it.
That's
the
it.
poem. Interesting.
That's it.
What year was this written?
Maybe about 3 or so years ago.
Okay.
4 years ago. But let me read the poem that the one I last wrote a few weeks ago.
Okay.
It's called Peeking Past the Past.
Peeking past the past.
Peeking past the past.
Okay.
Some people wear the past as if it were a trophy, even when it has shunned them and stripped them of fancy food and Sunday best, already tattered from the weight of their use. Some people hold on to the past even when it has flung them ashore from the belly of oceans, tunneling through time forgotten, discarded on garbage dumps like entrails seeking flies. Some people squeeze the past as if their last breath depended on its inflicted suffering, a suffering ignited as a reflex, and just like clockwork, lives anew when summoned. some people wear the past out.
Cut that. I want to ask you a question, but I don't know if I should ask you. And you smoke weed?
No, I don't. You know, I always go in my class and tell my students, I say, you can imagine if I was smoking weed and drinking alcohol?
You don't drink alcohol
I
either?
do not consume anything much of anything.
Not even a little wine, a little red wine?
Occasionally with friends.
Okay.
Not by myself, not occasionally with friends.
So this is a natural.
This is a natural thing. This is and I'm telling you, if you live in the spirit, if you live with an understanding of spirit, you pay attention to inspiration.
So when you said spirit, so does that mean that church is not a part? You were not raised in church?
Oh, I
or
was raised in a church. My
Okay.
parents took us to church. Yeah.
anything? Okay.
Methodist church. So if I go to Montego Bay now, my mother is a member of that church. She sings on the choir in that church. My mother is very much still involved in that church. My father passed away about 12 years ago. And he used to go to church as well. When I got to 18 and I was no longer living in my parents' house, I was not compelled to go to church anymore as an institution.
Okay.
But I understand very, very clearly and vividly the spirit world. I live in that world. I live in a world where I get inspiration, I get messages, I get visions from that world. And I'm very clear about what that means in my life. I am told things, I listen, and I act on them when I need to.
So when you say you hear, you're hearing it as clearly as you and I are having a conversation
Yes,
now?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's not a different voice. Like, the voice is not Allison talking to me.
Right.
It's, you know that spirit find anything it need to find to tell you what it need to tell you?
I believe that.
Okay. And I witness that in my life every day.
I believe that.
So I dream. I'm a dreamer. Yeah. That's Jamaica, do I know? We come from Africa.
Yeah, I know. Each of us has a
Is
level
whether
of
you're paying attention to
right,
it or not.
Right.
If you shut it off, and if you remember now, and it's important to understand that the church, the established church as it functions now in our society, is one that tells you to shut off some of those things too. What is this spirit you're talking about? Unless it's the Holy Spirit. Yes. But there is only one mind. And if you understand that spirit is that one mind is going to find a way to tell you what it needs to tell you when it needs to tell you. Yes.
So I'm gonna go a little bit off and talk about something that's really current to the day. From your side of the world, the church there with His Excellency and the unfortunate things that happened there. Based on your definition of spirit, a lot of people are saying that this man was crazy. But was he?
Well, first of all, I don't ever discuss religion in public. It's a choice I made more than 20 years ago
Fair.
because of an experience at the Million Man March in Washington, D.C. That I had. The only thing I want to say in response to your question is that we are going to see some very important things happening from now on in Jamaica as
Okay.
it relates to the spirit world. And the other thing is that the church, the established church, gets an opportunity to define what is a part of that church versus what is not a part of that church. And so religion is a site of contestation.
Okay.
It's about power. It's about who gets to define, who gets to label, who gets to determine who is included versus who is excluded. And I think that, I was having a conversation the other day with somebody, and they said, but look how we must treating the little boys, and all of these things that were coming out in terms of what might be questionable in terms of his sexuality,
Right.
all of these kinds of things. And I was like, if your vision in this time is short and you're not really exposed, you're gonna miss the fact that the Catholic Church has had a major problem with pedophilia. You're gonna miss the fact that the established church has had major challenges in and of itself. So who determines what nowadays? That's my only response.
And that's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
So as a student of culture,
Yes.
I am never one to denigrate what other people have come up with as a system to worship. I cannot, as a student of culture.
That's what I thought too. Being a spiritual culture that we are as well, we are very, I think I see we intertwine a lot of superstition into what is real. So the lines get blurred.
And remember that this is a country in which Obia is also still on the books as outlawed.
Yes.
And yet Obia represents perhaps one of the finest, let's say, traditions that would link us back to our African past. And there are some people who would listen to this and say, but the African past, we don't want to go back there, so.
Right.
But how do you take something out of yourself?
Right.
Melanated peoples live here.
Yes. Yes.
And that blood in our veins cannot be erased.
Yes. So interesting days ahead, I agree.
Very interesting days ahead.
Interesting days ahead. So, Dr. Stanley Niaah, what's next for you?
I almost feel as though there's something major coming. I don't know what it is, but I know that there is more work for me to do outside of the context of the University of the West Indies. And the university is my professional home, is my the space that I found my academic home. But I know that there is much more for me to do.
There's more work.
Yes, there are about 6 or so funded projects that I'm working on now, one of which is on gender-based violence. And I feel that one is going to spawn a number of things that I am to do beyond the university.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time.
You're very welcome.
With 6 funded projects, and you still find time to sit with me. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure being here.
This has been another episode of Storytelling in the Tropics. My name is Allison Harrison, my guest today.
And can I tell you that I'm very proud and pleased about this program?
Are you?
Just the name alone is so powerful.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're
I
very
appreciate
welcome.
That. A lot of what you've said, I subscribe to, as it relates to the spirit and your own stories and doing that yourself. I believe in that strongly. So
I cannot walk without the spirit.
yes.
I cannot walk without the spirit. If spirit said go, me go.
Yes.
If spirit said don't go, I don't go.
Yeah. Yeah.
If spirit said talk, I talk. I mean, it's so bad that if I go against my spirit, something happens. It just doesn't happen. Something gets in the way.
I believe that. Yes.
It happens all the time.
Yeah. True.
It's something, as simple as I get up in the morning, I'm having a meeting at 7 o'clock, and I just don't feel like being in a meeting at 7. Something happened. I get a message to say I'm delayed.
Yes.
It's just, So we really have to be careful about what we think and how we think, because thoughts are things. You have to be in a place where you are perfectly aligned with the universe. Be open to the messages, to the balance. That's how I live my life.
Just be open.
You have to be open, because I remember speaking to somebody recently, and I said, what would you lose if you decided to trust? Or decided to stay open? What would you lose? If you understand yourself to be guided and you can pay attention to the guidance, what would you lose? You always will be guided. You'll be guided to know what you must do, when you must do it, or you must do it.
This is gonna happen again in some shape or form.
Okay. She threatens.
Thank you again, Dr. Stanley
Yes,
Niaah.
you're very welcome. You see, all the conversation just can't even wrap
Just
up.
can't wrap up. This has been another episode of Storytelling in the Tropics. My name is Allison Harrison. My lovely guest, Dr. Sonjah Stanley Niaah.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Until next time, peace, love, and unity all the while. Go with the spirit. Blessings.